Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Lore You Know. Happy Friday. It is Friday, right?
Yeah.
Yay! Today we are
Yeah.
talking about Hollowfaust, one of my favorite cities, mainly because it takes a trope, it takes this like stereotype and just flips it to an extent. There is still a lot of weird shit. We were talking about this before the show. It is not quite Nightmare Before Christmas, but it's very Halloweeny.
Incredibly Halloween.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, before running this, go like watch The Addams Family again and not so much Nightmare Before Christmas, but whatever your macabre favorites are.
right. So the
This is all
original
of that.
the original was published in 2001, almost 20 years ago. That is awesome.
19 years old. Yeah, and it's and it's got it hasn't been any major publications, but it's got its revitalization in the new SLPG. It's
Yeah,
mentioned, and some of the stuff is brought in, but it's a solid setting.
yeah,
It's kind of in the middle of nowhere.
yeah. And I'll
Um,
bring that up on the map so everyone can see it.
yeah, and it's really interesting. Anyway, let's just dive into the history. To
Yeah. So let's looking at the map just real quick.
Yep.
It is kind of central, a little southwestern central. There is this mountain at the bottom of that range of mountains. Is that the Gascar Peaks?
Gascar Peaks.
Yeah,
Southern end of the Gascar
yeah,
Peaks. It's a volcano amongst a couple of volcanoes. Lochiel, as we talked about a couple episodes ago, is also on a volcano. Um, and
and they're pretty close to
presumably
one another too.
they're pretty close to one another. Yeah, yeah. Separated by not even 100 miles. So
Just a bit of desert and gross monsters running around in that desert.
and the festering fields. Yeah.
Yeah, there's
Hollowfest is easier to get to than Lochiel. There's a road.
right.
You cannot say Lochiel is much harder to get there because you have to fight through the zombies.
So just for
Not so much in
clarification, on
Hollowfest.
the map, is that golden line road or river? I've always thought road because it's gold and not blue, but I could be wrong.
Just that border,
Oh, that's a
country border,
borderline. That totally makes sense.
because you've got it around Vesh and you've got it around. So
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure it's a country border, and I think that gold line is the implication of the area controlled by
by
the city-state of
Holocaust.
Hollowfest,
Yeah,
just like the gold line around the Gleaming Valley is controlled by them.
makes
Um, uh,
sense.
yeah. Initially, I want to tip a hat to why this is fitting in really well because the Kickstarter for Dead Man's Rust launches next week
Monday.
and Monday, and Hollowfaust, while not explicitly part of Dead Man's Rust, certainly overlaps with it and is part of the overall
Yeah,
meta plot thing.
and I
In
feel
so
like
much as it has one.
we'll probably get to the bad guys in Dead
Yeah.
Man's Rust here soonish because they are like the extreme antithesis or
Of
rather like the more it's like the extreme stereotype of what you would expect necromancers to be like, whereas
Hollowfaust
Holofaust
is
is
the
like,
opposite.
we're all just people, and
Yeah.
granted we raise you after you're dead to do our work, but we're still people, right? So yeah.
Going into history. Um, uh, get the dates right.
Yeah.
About in OC 3085,
Yep.
which is a little under 400 years before the start of the Divine War. So this is not an ancient location. This is not like thousands of year old Jeweled City or the hundreds and hundreds of year old Shelzar.
Right.
This is 300, 400 years old, which is oldish, but in terms of Ghelspad, not really. There was this wonderful city, the south end of the Gascar Mountains called Sumara. The golden city of Sumara. Lovely place to be. It was founded as initially just as a little trading camp on the edge of the Zethiski or Zethisk um, uh, uh, kingdom
Yeah.
empire. Basically, so you had the Elzen Empire, and then Zakitsk ran all the way north and into this region. So this was pretty much on the edge of their place as a trading post between the dwarves of the Gascars, the elves of the Broadreach, now called the Hornzaw, and the humans of Zakitski. So it's like this little trading post. And it grew pretty rapidly over the next 100 and 150 years into a city and into one of the finest cities of Zakitski. It was like beautiful, and they had these cool baths, these public baths and everything, and it was just really neat. It was ruled by a satrap who was basically assigned by the emperor, but it was mostly a council called the Council of Patricians, high-ranking citizens, heads of households, that sort of thing. They did the legislative. The satrap was sort of executive. He basically, as I said, assigned by the emperor, and the emperor could be like, I don't like you anymore. Bloop, here's a new one. People in the city really had no choice there. And what was unique about it, and was really cool about this city, is that due to, they don't specify, but I assume like ley lines or something, this location is very high magic. Like, wizards loved it here because magic was just really easy to tap into. Some nature of the mountains, or something growing there. It just high general magic area. Maybe Mesos blessed it or something. I don't know. But it was just like, magic was great here. Then the Divine War started.
What?
Bit of a controversy in this book because the Ghelspad campaign setting specifies the Divine War began in 3466. This book explicitly says 3489. Makes me want to shoot myself in the head. Bad explanation. Maybe nothing regarding the war came here to affect it until it was 20 years in.
I mean, it does say it's decades long. The war was decades long in this book.
Yeah, the war was like 6 years long, so
maybe they didn't really have, a direct effect by it, and so they weren't counting yet. But
I guess. I don't know.
Once the shit hits the fan, you're definitely like, oh, well, this is going on.
Yeah. And as we know from working on these kind of books, sometimes communications fail, and these books were written very, very quickly, back to back, so maybe it was just a date that was wrong. But anyway, that aside, that's my shitty headcanon, is the war hadn't reached the area yet. So war hits, bad stuff starts to happen, and then about less than 20 years before the war ended, in OC 3513, the mountain that this was on, the dormant volcano, which they had, they knew it was a dormant volcano, they knew it wasn't extinct, they had put all these like spells to tell them if it was going to erupt. They failed because a titan and a god were causing mischief nearby, and the volcano erupted.
Or Chalesh.
Mount Kalesh, also known as Vangel's Throne.
Interesting.
Vangel's Throne, I believe I had that right. Which is just like, okay, guys are dramatic. Did Vangel cause the volcano to erupt? Did Thulkas cause the volcano to erupt? I don't know. How close it coincided with the eruption of the volcano at Lochiel, which also erupted during the war. It's big time volcanoes erupting on the edge of the Recruited Desert. I blame Thulkas. They probably happened around the same time. So the volcano at Lochiel that we talked about a few episodes ago, that caused a lahar that destroyed the city that was at the base of that mountain. This caused actual lava to flow in part of the city, broke one of the walls, flowed in part of the city. The walls and the city kind of prevented the lava from getting very far. So the lava didn't destroy the city, just like a quarter of it maybe. But the ashfall that followed the lava did destroy the city quite nicely. And in less than 24 hours, anyone who hadn't been able to flee died. So it was, and it was pretty. It wasn't quite as quick as Lokiel, but the city was a lot bigger than the little city that sat next to Lokiel.
Right.
A lot of people died because they couldn't get out, or just choking ash and everything else. So it's like, we'll be safe in the house. No, you won't. And just thousands of people died in less than a day, and it was pretty awful. And then the war, 20 more years of war, and then the war ended, and then what happens next? So lots of refugees post-war that had nowhere to live because we had massive areas where just things were just ripped apart and destroyed. The Horns, the Broadreefs became the Hornsaw. All these elves, bad things happened to them, and like the vegetation that was in the Gasgars, which was this wonderful verdant forest, is now just bald mountains. As most of the life there just died for reasons. I don't know if Gorak ate it or, do your own color there as a GM. How did all the life die in the mountains? Some way. It was the war. So there's a ton of refugees. And a lot of them were fleeing Calastia because, well, frankly, Calastia at the time wasn't that great place to live. And there was a lot of, like, they're starting to start their little conquering thing that we talked about a while ago. And so a bunch of people were fleeing that area. Amongst those folks were these 7 very powerful wizards and their followers. So figure it's about, I don't know, 50 people maybe. And these 7 wizards, and they're all wizards, but they're all powerful, high-level characters. We're like, we heard about this place, Sumara, which is high magic, lots of dead people, and we're all interested in that as sort of a magical science. Yeah. All 7 of them heard these rumors for various reasons, and for various reasons decided to get together and go on this kind of tour of this fallen city as a group. They like set this expedition up, brought in their followers because they were all very charismatic people. They all had some number of followers, and went on this pilgrimage to Samara to check it out. And the bunch of them arrive in these ruins, like some fleeing places, some just figuring their shit out, whatever it was. And all had different motives. They all have different like means and whatnot. But they all had the same interest, which was the concept of necromancy.
Mm-hmm.
And had heard about all these undead in the area. And this is right about when the festering fields were starting to fester. and the mounds of man were starting to be mounded.
Right.
So this is AV8. Very, very, very just after the end of the war. And so they went there, and for all different reasons, and they discovered this ruined city, and it was full of undead. I'm worried Discord's about to crash. Sorry, it's full of undead. So zombies and ghosts and all sorts of just blah. And it turned out that high magic that was in that region had kind of transmogrified as a result of the disaster in the war and possibly Mesos' death and who knows what into necrotic or negative energy or however you want to call it magic. So in old school it was negative energy, and in 5th edition it's called necrotic, but either way it's all transformed into that kind of energy. And all these guys, half of them are necromancers, were like, yeah, this is cool. We can do stuff with it. And it was just such a high concentration. Literally, when you're in Hollowfaust and you cast a necromantic spell, it's empowered. Not in terms of necessarily the definition of empowered, but it is enhanced in some way.
Right.
Like, the rules around that, vary. But it could be like, the AC's gone up, or it's +1 damage, or something like that. But in either case, your necrotic or spells are way more powerful, and your all of your necromancy spells are in some ways more powerful when you're in that area. So these guys were like, this is awesome. So 7 pilgrims. There was should I name them all?
Sure.
One of them. So we had Strondo. He's a wizard, craftsman. He was really big into making servitor undead. So he's like the guy who would have the whole group of skeletons carrying his stuff. Classic necromancer in that sense.
Right.
He was kind of a douche, but not mega douche, you know. I'd say cold. As rooms are a ash room. I can't pronounce any of this shit. You know I
Yeah,
can't.
you get
A
some. So we've
A
got some weird consonants right before other consonants that really shouldn't. That doesn't make any sense. But Armuzda.
Ahrumuzda.
I always go with
Irad.
Armuzda. Armuzda Irat. Yeah.
Irad. I'm just going with his last name. Airat. Irad. He's head of the Society of Immortals. Basically completely obsessed with immortality and attempting to figure out how I can be a lich and still be me. Basically, he's kind of horrible.
Yeah, and he's
Like
kind of the founder of.
Well, we'll get to that. We'll get
Yeah.
to that. What he's the founder of, but he's like, you know, okay. Barastrato's kind of a douche. This guy is just completely irreverently evil.
Yeah.
Just horrible. You know what I meant. Okay, next we have Taason, Taason, the Black. He's big on negative energy. This is the guy who invented Scarland's equivalent of Finger of Death. So blood knows how to channel negative energy into magical power and death magic. He was a war mage during the Divine War, and it is able to kill on the words. Is like that's you know, word of death or finger of death or whatever you want to call it. But then we kind of flip over. Not all these pilgrims were horrible. There was Carthia, a physician, a doctor, who used necromancy to understand bodies and their weaknesses, and a devout follower of Nemorga, but not a cleric. It's kind of interesting. And she was just nice and was like, I'm all into healing and medicine, and she was basically a surgeon. And she had a mortal servant, i.e. not an undead, named Sarant, who's this really buff warrior guy, and he was effectively her boyfriend, and they were like the good guys of this group of pilgrims. There's also Sepharel the Weary, which I kind of think that's the greatest name. I feel bad for this guy. He's actually a cleric, not a wizard like the rest of them. High Priest of Nemorga. And he suffered from anemia that his own cleric magic wasn't able to cure, which is pretty extreme. And he was pretty groovy guy. I'm not as nice as Carthia, but not evil. And then there's probably the nicest one of the pile is Peridate. I don't know. Paeridates.
Peridates.
Peridates? She's a wizard, diviner, and her shtick is kind of interesting. She will use divinations by speaking to the dead, so speaker of the dead in that sense. Known for her legendary wisdom, she's also the most trustworthy of the pilgrims. So my brain interprets that as lawful good, and eases the sufferings of the dead as they die. And then finally, the last pilgrim is Malhadra Demos, probably the most influential of them all. He was a mentalist, studied the ability to affect people's brains and nerves and emotions and dreams. Really interesting guy.
Mm-hmm.
Is he a wizard or a bard? And there's some debate as to maybe both. He was joined by curiosity, but he also uh, has it almost didn't he almost doesn't fit with the rest.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, necromancer into this, into that, cleric into dealing with the dead. He was like more into me, he's the gothiest goth. He's all about fear and nightmares and what's related to that. So less necromancy and more of the accoutrements around it.
Yeah.
More of the vibe.
Yeah. And
You know?
I feel like all of them were tied together with this sense of like
Yeah.
scholarly investigation. Like they each had their own areas they were interested in, but it all came down to the type of energy, and they were all like, "This is the place." So I think that's what tied them all together, even though they were vastly different personalities.
And vastly different alignments. You're like,
Yeah.
how is this lawful good diviner associated with this clearly neutral evil douchebag who's
Right.
like, with the necrotic energy, and yet they're joined together. And I think a lot of that speaks to the alliances made during the Divine War, since
Mm-hmm.
these were all on the victor's side. Those alliances had to be made to fight the Titans, so they stuck around for a few years. And this is less than a decade at the end of the war that they decided to make this pilgrimage, fund it, and went there. So they basically found the ruins of the city, sent their various skeleton servitors to kind of clean it up and be like, can you undig a house so we have a roof tonight, kind of thing. And they started to establish like a little base there. And like I said, I don't think there was 50 people. That's probably 50 counting all the zombies they had at their disposal. But they also found, as they're starting to dig out, they found tons of parts. At least for the folks who were interested in that sort of thing, our craftsman was like, "Sweet, look at all the stuff I can make out of
Yeah.
these dead people's bits." But there was also the two that were interested in dealing with the ghosts and stuff, and they started going, okay, we have to put these people to rest and send the ghosts, back where they should be instead of haunting this place off to, their afterlives and stuff. So there was this whole mission involved, and they were all kind of working together on this and building this sort of small little, and not even a community, settlement barely,
Yeah.
camp
And I
maybe.
feel like it wasn't their initial plan to stay. It was like,
No.
this is going to be a stopping point. Oh, what is this? This is interesting. And they started digging, and then it just went from there.
Yeah, and they're like, maybe we are going to stay because this is
Yeah.
pretty amazing. And as they discover all their necromantic energies are pretty much boosted. So they're there for about a few years when, as I mentioned before, there was like this other influx of refugees coming out of the region. Um, this where Hollowfaust sits, and it wasn't even called Hollowfaust at this point, just the ruins of Samara, where it sits is right on the edge of a relatively safe passageway from coming out of the Calastian regions, because Calastia is starting to recover, but then you've got this burgeoning empire mumbling, and there's still like the remnants of the Charduni dwarves and all the tyranny around that. So this place is not a nice place to be for that reason, in terms of
Mm-hmm.
at least politics. And this place is horrible because it's just desert and swamp and awfulness. So other than Shelzar, there's not really anything out here.
Yeah.
So, and you can't go north because you've got unpassable mountains and the Blood Steppes and the Hornsaw.
Yeah.
So there, and then the Blood Sea. So there's not a lot of places people can go. So a lot of people fled, trying to get to like maybe Darrakeen to the northwest. And there's this tiny passage between the Festering Fields and the Hornsaw Forest that's this very narrow but mostly safe region, through what later becomes the heteronomy of Verduk, through this area and just to Hollowfaust, and then you can kind of follow up through the edge of the Recruiting Desert to get to Darrakeen. So, or to the Dwarves or the Gleaming Valley, or whatever you want to get to there. So it's like this little sliver of safety that they discovered at this time of like, we can't go north because there's death forest. We can't go south because there's death fields of undead festering, huge, sweltering planes and all that business. It's too hot, too deadly, too tree-y deadly, but this is it. So those people. And the refugees there was a lot of them, and they kind of started clumping together because as they looked for places to go, the groups get bigger and bigger until there was this one really huge group of refugees led by a former general named Dunzad Lamartos. He was a general during the Divine War who deserted his post. Good job. But for good reasons, to protect his family, because he was like, I'm kind of done. I need to help my people. So he went to protect his family, to find some place safe for them. And as a result, he's just so charismatic and skillful that just these several hundred people were like, please take us somewhere safe.
Right.
And he's like, I'll try. And they kind of made this march along this narrow track.
And a lot of those people were just commoners. They didn't have the know-how of how to survive. And so you've got this guy who's charismatic and is a warrior, is, a leader in this army. Even though he deserted, first of all, he might not have told them that. But second, he's obviously capable. So it's very easy for them to be like, let's follow this guy. And he just happened to know what he was talking about. Oh, so your audio cut out. Can you repeat that?
Oh, he kind of leads them just to someplace safer along this corridor. And eventually they make it to Hollowfaust, or what will become Hollowfaust. And they're like, hi, can we rest for the night? And, well, they get there first. They get there, and then, they're like, hey, look, there's some lights and smoke, because they're seeing, their chimney smoke or whatever.
It's something moving around.
And they get there, and, there's the city walls, which are, in that area are intact and, fixed up a little bit. But then there's this group of zombies and skeletons just sort of standing there. And they get there, and immediately the zombies and skeletons are like, ooh, and they start attacking them, and they're like, shit. Like, please, no. We're just passing by. Don't bother us. And the necromancers come out, and they're like, stop fighting them. What's going on? Who are you people? And the refugees are just like, can we stay here? Because there's nowhere safe. And the pilgrims are like, And the pilgrims had this big debate.
Yeah.
Should we let them stay or tell them to keep going and make their way to... And they don't even know if Derekine even exists by this point. This is AV, 12 or something, if that. I think this is just a little bit later, maybe 8 or 9. This is very, very close to after they founded this little place. So they don't know what's safe. They just know desert, forest, bad, mountains, impassable. Where do we go? And they're like, can we stay here? So the pilgrims debated this. And the guy who makes the zombies is like, no, that's too much work. I don't want to deal with this. The guy who was all like, I want to be a lich, is like, yes, please let them stay, and I will use them as test subjects. And they said, Ariat, shut up. We don't want to hear your opinion.
I'll just go over here and plot myself.
That's what happened.
Yeah.
You don't get a vote, buddy. No. And then Taste in the Black was like, no, no. So you have the doctor and the cleric and the diviner are all like, we should help them. It would be good for us. So the vote really comes down to Demos, who's like, I don't know. Let me make sure I'm reading my notes right. But Pilgrims eventually lost. Yeah, Demos. The Demos was initially said no. He's like, no, too difficult. We got our thing. We want to do our thing. We don't want to have a bunch of people here distracting us. And apparently, this is all like lost in time or whatnot. But the implication is that he had a crush on Carthia, the doctor, who had a boyfriend, the big bruiser warrior guy. But he kind of had a crush on her or something, or a love interest, or there's some vibes there, and she talked him into letting them stay. She's like, look, this is good for us. These could be potential help if something happens. They can grow food for us, then we can spend our time doing our experiments and stuff, and we don't have to worry about that. This would be helpful, and they could help just turn this into a viable community. And she talked him into it. So basically effectively 4-3 if you discount Muhahaha guy's vote.
Whoa.
Who did vote yes, but for the wrong reasons. Everybody. So they moved in,
Yeah.
and they started clearing out the city. They eventually built a wall, where because the city's massive. They can hold like several 100,000 people, and this is like several, maybe 1,000 people. So they don't need the whole city by any means, and they basically built this wall in the middle of the city that's sort of like undead go there, and people go here. So there's what's the ghost city, and then there's the people city, and then there's the Underfaust, which is sort of the third area, which is these catacombs underneath the mountain. And so the city's going to divide it up into these 3 regions. Pretty cool.
Yeah.
But again, the population pretty small. This isn't even 1,000 people. This is several hundred people. And then there's then they go fine for about 10 years. Things are starting to build. They're like, well, plant plants and build farms and things, things like that, and survive in the post-apocalyptic world of Scarland. And then these folks out of the Urkrudan Desert, called the Sutak, who we talked about before, the horse people, and not the iron-red good horse people, but the Titan-worshipping crazy horse people who still worship Lulgas, decided, who have spent their time living on the edges of the Urkrudan Desert, attacking, which has almost no resources, get all their resources by attacking settlements on the border of the desert, see this new settlement on the border of the desert, and they're like, ooh, we're gonna go take what they've got. They were building things. Let's go take it. So a bunch of Sutak show up, and they're like, gimme. And of course, the pilgrims are like, zombies.
Right.
And there's this little siege that occurs. And because the Sutaks are fairly unorganized, they're just like rabid barbarians, like, ooh, we're gonna get you. And siege lasts 4 whole days, and the Carthy's bodyguard, or Sarant, who becomes the Unfailing, who's dubbed that title because of this, basically goes out into the battlefield and goes toe to toe with the general of the Sutak in like this mano a mano drag out fisty
Mano
fight.
e Horso? I don't know.
Mano e Horso, and just destroys this poor Sutak. And literally rips him in pieces and throws him on like a cloak, walking around the battlefield like mine, and the Sutak freak out and run away. So, overall successful little siege there. But it was also, a lot of it was because of what the refugees had done in terms of building up the city and building their defenses.
Yeah.
And they realized,
I don't know if we've really like expressed how much they did before the other refugees got there. Like, all of those dead people were now walking around cleaning up the town, removing the ash, building these walls. Like, it was a force. And so, like, I forgot where I was going to go with this. Please continue.
Before this, it was 7 pilgrims / necromancers and their handful of followers and a bunch of undead. Now you've got several hundred people who are like, here, let's turn this into a community.
Right.
Who are trying to dig the existence. And the pilgrims, all of them, finally saw the value of these refugees during the time of this siege, because they were able to do all those things that, you can have a skeleton like, oh, go fight the Sutak, but honestly, the skeletons didn't have a chance. You send the skeletons and the zombies out, and they just get their asses kicked because one fireball and zombie dust. And these Sutak are very good at that fireball because they're all fire wizards. So they would have had their asses kicked if it wasn't for these refugees. So they realized, wow, we have all these people. We now really have to put an effort into this and to their survival, because our survival is dependent upon their survival. And they're not just a source of potential food diversity and bodies in the future, depending on which necromancer you are. So they started like, okay, I guess we need a government. So the 7 pilgrims are like, we're going to establish the Sovereign Council, and we're going to rule you guys as the council, and you're going to do what we say. And the people
Right.
are like, okay,
All
you were
right.
here
Right.
first. What are we going to say? You're powerful, super duper wizards. We're just farmers and butchers and coopers and, we're just people.
Right.
So they're like, sure. And they establish a little government, and they start building laws and building infrastructure and a sewage plant and, things you need. and civic projects and all of that business. And they spend the next 10 years turning it into an actual community, as opposed to just a bunch of tents or not really tents. I guess they had the buildings, but a bunch of buildings that they sort of lived in after they kind of dug out the remains of the ashes and the bodies. So then the bad shit went down. So remember Muhuhua guy who was
Yeah.
all like, hey, I'll use the refugees for my experiments? Well, they told him not to, but he did it anyway. And he started just doing some nasty, unspoken of stuff. And the book leaves it up to your imagination. Something horrible. We know is something horrible. People missing. And he allies with basically the two of the original 7 pilgrims, Ariat, who obsessed with lichdom, and Tayson the Black, Mr. Negative Energy guy, basically both do some really horrific things with our population of convenient mortals just hanging out, and they get caught by the other pilgrims, and they're like, yeah, no, you are not allowed to do that. We told you weren't allowed to do that, and you did it anyway. But the big thing that the discovery that was made was that Tayson was basically offing anybody who got in his way, and he wasn't powerful enough to take out any of the other pilgrims, but he was taking out some of their followers. And it's like slowly just being like, no, and just like executing various people for his own reasons, for his own motivations. And one of them he takes on is actually one of the disciples of the Abyss, so Tayson, the Lugu guy,
Right.
takes one of the disciples of Ariat, who Ariat did not get along with, who was like, he's been a thorn in my side for a while. He's kind of doesn't work. He doesn't get it. So he takes this disciple, Barrio, and basically kills him and starts experimenting on the body. And doing some pretty horrible things with his own, like, I want lichdom, so I'm going to make a lich and see how it goes, and see how, how hard it is to kill a lich, and what this whole does. And so he basically takes Barrio's body, raises him as a lich, and starts poking at him with things. And the other pilgrims discover him in the middle of this, and they're like, what are you doing? Freaking out. And then slowly uncover, they do some investigation and uncover all of the other atrocious things that, they find the pile of bodies. They find, like, how many people he's actually killed. And they're like, we can't live with this. We can't have a community with these 2 guys and their followers doing this.
And I feel like so Tayson's like job was kind of like to root out people who were unable to do their jobs and were like grossly neglecting their duties and stuff, and to like take care of them. I don't think they understood that his version of take care of them was not just like firing them. They don't get a pink slip. They don't like leave. They became experiments. And then when it was found out that Barrioi was part of this, everyone knew he was like a chill dude. He like had a good mind.
Was like considered perfect. Like,
right.
He was just this nicest. He was considered fair-minded. He was considered logical. He was basically lawful good in every definition there.
Right.
And they're like, and he picked him mostly because Ariat just didn't like Barrio, because they were so, Ariat's basically neutral evil, and Barrio's basically neutral good. Even though they're both interested in kind of the same stuff, they're both interested in how negative energy works. They were so opposed
right.
that Tayson just used this opportunity to take him out. stake barrier, and so all the all this kind of goes back in their face, and the other pilgrims basically drag them out in front of the community, like, these guys fucked up badly, and we're going to punish them. They don't say what crimes they committed. They kind of like, for unnamed crimes, but because they were so essential in the founding of the city, we can't just kill them.
Right.
So they exile them. So both those pilgrims plus all of I'm gonna get it right. All of the Society of Immortals, so all of Ariat's folks, and half of Taston's folks are kicked out of the city. Like, or well, not quite city yet, but kicked out of the community. Like, out, you go away.
And I do feel like this would be like one of those situations where, in hindsight, you're like, we're never exiling anyone again. They're going to become because
well,
they're just terrible people.
They are terrible people, but to be fair, they never directly, or to date, I should say, they haven't directly gone against Hollowfaust.
And it could be a survival thing. They know they can't overcome the power of Hollowfaust, but they can sure fuck with the rest of the world.
Yeah, and they can sure make things challenging for Hollowfaust.
Yeah.
So even though they don't directly go against Hollowfaust, they still indirectly go against Hollowfaust a lot. They basically, the bunch of them, which is not massive numbers, but the bunch of them wander off to the Hornsaw Forest, and found Glivid-Autel, which is their translation for the Society. Glivid-Autel, you will hear about in Dead Man's Rust.
Yeah.
And it's their, so basically they found the city of the irredeemably evil necromancers against the city of the neutral/good necromancers. So, which is, I would say Hollowfaust is bigger and more powerful, but Glivid-Autel has other resources and other allies that are, pretty awful. So they leave, they found their own thing, and they make some friends while they're out there. The several let me think, I'm gonna get the dates right. Refugees, exile, and then I didn't bold that, that's why. So that's an AV-27 that they kick all them out. They go out there, establish this new community, Glivid-Autel, and then make friends with some of the Mormo followers, some of the Mormites. Specifically the Gorgons of the Torn Womb, which is one of the Mormo groups. The Gorgons we talked about, they were we talked about in the Asathis thing, they were the weird, the Yuan-Ti, they got transmogrified into humanoid with the snaky tentacles out of their chest people, and the dog, lion creatures with the tentacles for a mane, those guys. So they meet up with some of them, these necromancers, and they're like, hey, we want to build a community here, and the Gorgons are like, okay. And they're like, we're evil, you're evil, yes, okay. And the Gorgons are like, what can you give us? And they're like, well, there's this community of necromancers over on that mountain over there. Here's how to get in their back door.
Right.
Basically give them information to help them go take out Hollowfaust. And the Gorgons are like, cool, okay, you can build a community here, we will, And they let them build a Glivid-Autel, and the Gorgons are like, let's go besiege Hollowfaust. And thus, the second siege of Hollowfaust, with a bunch of Gorgons show up. So the Sutak, while there were a bunch of barbarians, they were pretty organized. They had the fire wizards, and they had that high general, they, rank and file. They had some structure. Gorgons do not have structure. They have and lion creatures, and they just sort of show up and try to rip you apart and throw magic at you. They're savage, and they're more packy than pack-related, like vicious wolves, than organized rank and file with the spears and the shields and all that business. So they show up, but the Hollowfaust was prepared. They were still worried about the Sutak coming back. So they set up all these divination spells in the area. I'm picturing, those little eyeball things and whatnot. But they're mostly looking toward the Akrudin for an attack, because they think the Sutak are going to come back. They weren't looking necessarily from the east, from Hollowfaust, but they did see them coming. So several days before this giant mass of slabbering Mormites show up, they've had time to prepare. And they know they're coming, and when they attack, the Gorgons really don't stand a chance. The siege lasts, I don't know, a week. Yeah, so a little bit longer than the first siege. And alas, the diviner pilgrim, I still could never pronounce her name, Peridates, who's using divination magic to find out, what their battle plan is and how to fight them and all this business. She summons ghosts to use her divination through some mystical way, and part of her spells. And one of the spells backfires, and she ends up getting basically drained by a ghost she summons, and she dies. So I just pictured like Megacon drain if we want to go to the rules. They just said she aged to death in an instant, but effectively, whether you talk color of rules plot, she dies horribly, and it's sad. And everybody's really sad about that. But they fight off the Gorgons, and that's happened there, and they don't really hear much. They find out that the Gorgons were sent by Ghelspad, but beyond that, they don't really hear much.
Yeah.
Although many years later, they do discover that Ghelspad no longer being ruled by the two pilgrims, but by some guy named Kratos the Necrotic King, who was just like this shitty apprentice, who they didn't think was worth anything before they left, and somehow he takes over.
Yeah.
Like, something happened there. There's some plot. But groovy. So next chunk of time, big window of peace between for the next 30-40 odd years. First of all, the disciples of the Abyss, the remainder of them, so half of them went to Ghelspad, the other half are still in Hollowfaust, being led now by I was turned into a lich, Varios. So he's my favorite NPC in Hollowfaust, the lawful good lich. Three words that do not belong together. Lawful good lich. I love those three words together. I love him as an NPC. He's the head of their secret police.
Yeah.
And his job is to literally root out necromancy that's gone too far. Bad.
Yeah.
And anything that threatens the city. So I've used him several times. He usually, when my PCs show up at Hollowfaust, he will almost inevitably make an appearance and go, "What are you up to? Don't fuck around my city." So I think he's pretty fun. There was a little tiny window where they had to replace. It says they had to have 7 rulers in the council, so odd number for voting and whatnot. So when they made Barrios replaced the head of the Disciples of the Abyss, but they didn't have a new replacement because they kicked out an entire group.
Right.
They only had 6 kind of guilds now, because each of these necromancers were head of a guild. So they made Sarant, the guy who single-handedly beat up the Sutek warrior, they put him as the 7th. But it was kind of a problem because he's Carthia's boyfriend/husband, and they're like, he's just going to side with her on everything. So he's not really a 7th voice. He's just makes her voice more powerful. So that's a conflict of interest right there. And also, honestly, he didn't really want the job. He was just like, I want to start a group of warriors and train them. I don't want to be making these decisions on a council. I'm not a politician. So he served in the role very briefly, until some more folks showed up. And a group from the east, from Logeny, and the way I picture it is, again, the Calastian Empire is, and I think this is before Logeny kicked out all the Belsamites, but they were certainly undergoing a big upheaval with change, and there's this entertainer named Yilamir, and her people show up on the doorstep. like, hi, we're looking for a place to live, and we're really into the occult. She's the gothiest goth ever who goth the goth. She's like, I want to come to Hollowfaust because I'm really into wearing black.
Right?
And she shows up with a bunch of wizards, sorcerers, and bards, and demonstrates knowledge of basically dirges, requiems, chants of funereal purpose. And it's like, we're really into this stuff. And the guild, the council were like, you are perfect. They love her. And she starts a new guild called the Guild of the Banshee. And she takes over from letting Sarant kind of retire and go off and train a bunch of warriors and not have to make decisions. And she becomes the 7th member. And he goes off and creates the Unfailing, this group of warriors. So she and they kind of love her. And during that time also, Carthia, the healer, or the doctor, steps down because she's just getting old and frail. And then about 14 years after that, she passes away. And Surat, her love, like, she dies. He goes to her, like, lie down next to her body as they're putting it in the tomb and just dies next to her. It's of sad. But I mean, he was really freaking old by that point anyway too, so they kind of die of old and whatnot. And also during that era, Seraphel the Weary died. So because honestly, this is like, Hollowfaust is now 60, 70 years old. Or well, what, 50, 60 years old, and so the founders are getting old, and several of them have died. So at this point, we're down to 2 founders are left. 2 or 3 founders are left. Third siege, AV 72. They have 34 years of peace. A few sad things happen, but a few joyous things happen. And then the Sutak come back for revenge.
The Sutak.
I figure it's the son of the general who got ripped apart or something like that. You know, they don't specify, but they come back with an army twice the size of the army they had before. 60 years have passed in Hollowfaust. Hollowfaust is more than twice the size it was before. Right. But the army's better disciplined. They bring siege engines. They bring better magic. They bring more fireballs. The necromancers have built more walls. They have more undead. They have animated siege engines that throw bone javelins. They have this new guard called the Stygian Guard, who are super badass and amazing. They're these cool folks. The mercenary elite. Basically, they had a bunch of mercenaries came in, led by the original that original refugee guy led all the refugees. His son leads this mercenary guard. And so they've got all these guys, the Stygian Guard. The Stygian Guard, so implying that Styx is a thing in Scarred Land.
Right.
I don't know. Anyway,
English and being used in places it shouldn't be used. So
there's another siege. I'd say the Sutak do better, but Hollowfaust is better. The siege certainly lasts longer. And Barastraudo, the Animators Society that had one of the pilgrims, he makes these siege engines, and there's a great name for them, the Osius Calibre. It's a fancy name for a bone siege engine, but there is. He runs out to go fix his siege engine in the middle of the fight on the battlements, and 3 Sutak conjuring wizards throw these spells at him all at once that basically take out his shield, because he's got like sort of a magic no hit me shield, and they just nullify it. And then they use probably telekinesis or something, that some other magic spell, to pull him off the wall, like literally just like woof him off the wall. And then all the Sutak warriors come up with their big swords and just stab him to death. So because he's still a wizard and he's still made of paper mache,
And once you remove those magical defenses, it's pretty easy to poke them with things.
Yeah, yeah. So, because, his AC that was 25 when he was on the wall is now
12?
12.
Right.
and and so all the fighters come in and kill him. So we lose another pilgrim in this siege. So it was not, 100% successful siege. That happened. So that was sad. So now we're down to even fewer pilgrims. Finally, we get another 50 years go by of peace, growth, population grows, trade starts up. They build a road that connects to that trail and start basically build a road north into the Gascars and east toward what eventually is the Heteronomy of Verduk. Or, yeah, Heteronomy of Verduk. Ha! I remember names. I'm so proud of myself. and Hollowfaust becomes a trade stop
Yeah.
between Calastia and Derakeen. Big deal. Although it's weird. People are like, there's these weird goths. But you can stop there and they'll buy your furs and potatoes.
Just don't die there.
Just
You'll
don't
be
die
fine.
there.
Oh no. Oh no, Sarah froze. And there she goes. We'll hang on for a minute while she comes back. If you have any questions for us and about Hollowfaust or the history of it, the current, it is tradition. The current status of it, we will get to as well, but the history of it. And then this will be at least a two-parter. There's a lot of information to go over with Hollowfaust, and we're going to go over. They have a lot of unique monsters, so that'll be a future episode, possibly on Black Friday here in the U.S. or the week after. Oh my goodness! Yes, it should be a drinking game. Every time Sarah crashes, we will chug a. Okay, I'm just gonna drink my tea, but next time I'll bring up a bottle of liquor. Where was she? And I'll jump in. Okay, so there's the growth. Everyone was using them as a waypoint between Derakeen and Calastia. It says that some Hollowfausters became they were seeking knowledge and magic and wealth in the surrounding lands, and so you had these adventuring bands of necromancers roaming the countryside, trying to mimic, essentially a D&D group. And they, is that a Sarah? Can you hear me? All right, not quite back yet. She's working on it. But they used the sages in the area and from all over Scarred Lands use these adventuring bands as a way to collect vital information on the Akrudin and the Hornsaw and that that whole area and the Asathi, who were also nearby. And Sarah, you're back. Oh, but I can't hear you.
Normally
Okay,
Discord's fast, but it decided it needed to update.
Of course.
I swear, I ran it beforehand and thought it was up to date, but
well, it's like every time I run a game on Astral, they run an update at that same time, so it hasn't been as bad lately, but I think it's just fate.
Well, I ran last, I don't know if anybody on this chat watched it, but I ran a game last Sunday, and I believe Discord crashed about 10 times in
that sounds about
4.5-hour game that I was streaming over Twitch. So
yay.
Yeah, lots of fun, and I still feel bad about that. I've updated, I've upgraded everything but my hardware, so.
So I talked about the wandering bands of adventurers coming from Hollowfaust.
Yeah.
So now we should be on the next siege.
The next siege, perfect.
Which, guess who it was?
It was not the Mormites this time. It was once again the Sutek for the third time.
Because when you fail twice,
we're gonna go the third time. Even more organized.
Try again.
This group of this was 126 AV. Group called the Hemtakt Barak, led by Baraka, the Fire Warlock, who was completely believed that he was sent by Thulkas to go kick ass
Yeah.
and incinerate many, many, many legions of undead, and he was quite capable of it, as he could single-handedly use his mighty fire magic to incinerate entire skeleton legions, and that sucks for Hollowfaust.
And I will throw out there, it's just an interesting tie-in that there's this weird event or happening in the Accrudan where these beings just come walking out and they're like, hey, Thulkas sent me. Die. There's Usa Hosai, the orc from Shelzar. There's this guy, and there's another one, and it's just an interesting thing that these Thulkas worshippers are just walking out of this desert with crazy amounts of power.
Like, if we go back to that, Thulkas wasn't dismembered. He's conscious. He's one of the handful of Titans who are still quite capable of communication. You just have to get to the sun.
Your wife wins the pun award. Thulkas has singeing telegrams.
That's what I picture it is.
It's like singing telegrams, but singeing.
Singeing. He has no interest in leaving the sun. He loves it there. But he's still interested in revenge because he's mad that they did that to him, that without his say so. So I'm sure he sends like messages and mental stuff to his followers saying, "Do my will,"
right?
And most of that goes straight to the Accrudan Desert because it's where he has the biggest connection to on Skarn, or one of the biggest connections certainly. So it does not surprise me at all that they're like, "I was told by Thulkas to do this," because they probably were.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thulkas, Kadam. And Kadam's not really approachable. Queen Rand's got that covered, so I can't even think of a Titan who's really accessible in that way.
Yeah.
In terms of at least mentally accessible, not necessarily can go there, but you could make a connection to him. So it does not surprise me if they were just sent by him. So anyway, they go on this fourth siege.
Mm-hmm.
This is bad. Like Hollowfaust, this is a serious, scary threat, and they're like, we're screwed. Stygian Guard are doing their best. The undead army is just slaughtered, or well, can you slaughter something that's not that to be blown up anyway?
Sure. Yeah.
They get through the first wall. People are retreating into the city, and 2 days into this, the pilgrims, or the council at this point, they're
the remaining right
pilgrims. The council just sort of go into the mountain, doing something. They're just not to be seen, and they're like, "You're our most powerful spellcasters. Come out and help." They're like, "We're busy," and they're like, "What's going on?" And some people are like, coming to the room and whatever, and they're here chanting. They're doing something. So Sutek breached the outer wall, reached the civilian quarter. The Stygian Guard barely defeats them, barely holding the wall. 7th day of the siege. The Necromancers come out. The council comes out, and they have developed something new.
They have a friend.
And have a new friend. And out of the volcano flies a gargantuan rack dragon called the Bone Rack Dragon. And that is the new defender of Hollowfaust. And it comes and annihilates the Sutek army. Like, you want fire? I'll give you... I don't know what the Bone Rack Dragon breathes, but I'll give you some equivalent. And it just comes out, and they don't have a chance. As air support flies in, and it kills the head of the Sutek, and the rest of the Sutek just run in terror. The Necromancers claim Faraka, the Sutek's leader's body, and rumors in the city persist that every once in a while they resurrect him and torture him and then kill him again or something like that. Anyway, there's rumors.
Yeah. So, just to throw this out there, the Bone Rack Dragon's breath is black lightning. It's as cold as true lightning is hot, and as dark as true thunderbolt is bright. It's negative energy, and essentially they just had no defense against it because they weren't. I mean, you have these like fire wizards, and this thing just comes out and is like breathing this crazy negative energy molded into this weird lightning bolt. What were they
Yeah.
going to do?
And they could have been prepared for negative energy because they're fighting necromancers, but they're not prepared for lightning.
Right.
And yeah, and so it's like, and it's also a gargantuan dragon coming from above that, and they're, maybe they have arrows, but they're mostly throwing fireballs at things.
Yeah.
And they don't have a chance. So that was AV 126. It is now presumably AV 150. We're back in a time of peace in Hollowfaust, having survived 4 sieges in its 140 odd years. They still have certainly concerns. They basically have one ally, Lokiel. And Lokiel is less their ally than their Lokiel's ally, because Lokiel doesn't have much power at all. It's a tiny little library.
I mean,
It's an awesome
they can
library.
let you check books out.
Yeah.
But they're not going to send an army to help you.
Yeah, it's mostly that Lokiel asks them for help, really. Like,
right.
Hello, there's bad things. So they don't really, because they're too weird. Nobody wants to ally with Hollowfaust. We're not their enemy, but they're certainly not Keen was a trade partner, but they're not really an ally. There's certainly the threat from Calastia. Can't say Verduck, who's trying to seek his own immortality, isn't interested.
Yeah.
And in what they're doing, and I think he'd love to conquer Hollowfaust. There's certainly ever-present threat of both the Sutak and Glivid Autel, and throw in also out there Dahane or Chardonnay, those guys behind the creepy bone wall.
Yeah.
They could come and attack anytime too. So if they ever leave their isolated little North Korea, so Hollowfaust is in the middle of just yuck.
Yeah.
And not a lot of good. And then there was this little stinger in the book as a Charduni, those dark dwarves, prince named Durzad Harathi Chardun, has arrived recently with a cart of gold medals and weapons demanding instructions in necromancy. So
right.
there is that.
Sorry, we don't just give that out. I know, that's why I brought this cart full of, valuables. I don't think you know what I mean, but we don't just give that out. But I do like that cart. We'll talk in private.
Like paragraphs, and this guy shows up, and you're like, okay, there's potential plot
right
there. So that's kind of the history.
Yeah.
And it's like most of it's during post-war. But it definitely creates this interest, and I love. I mean, one of the early sections of the book describes gourds. Did I write it down? I don't remember if I wrote it down, but gourds that are shaped into horrific skeleton faces.
Right.
And I was like, they're jack-o'-lanterns.
Absolutely.
Oh my god,
yeah.
they're jack-o'-lanterns. That's like one of their decor. The 5e book doesn't really contradict any of this lore too, which made me happy.
Yeah.
The only really thing they did was they added an additional language. Which made and a language that made sense. So the old lore said Lydian and Erkruden. They added Dahan. So, but that's just literally the region where Dahan is originated. So it would be stupid that the Hollowfaustians didn't speak.
You're right.
But other than that, pretty much the same.
Yeah.
Description.
So
5e.
No, go ahead.
Oh, the 5e book also has some other materials that lets you really leverage coming from Hollowfaust or living in Hollowfaust or adventuring there. There's a special feat that they introduced called Ghost Speaker, which aligns really well to one of those little organizations. There's a bard archetype bard college called College of Mourners, so you can play one of those funky goth bards.
Yeah.
Fighter archetype for the Unfailing, so you can play one of those fighters who defend the city so well. And then a background Society of Immortals, which is basically the no, not background. Sorry, that's the bad guys. They talk about those a little bit well, and who they're about. There's a section on them in the society section in the 5e book. So, and then there's a ton of spells and rituals. In the 5e books, and not just in the SLPG, but various other publications that come sourced in Hollowfaust. If it's a necromancy spell, it came from Hollowfaust, frankly. And there's some cool rituals as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, great setting. To me, it's like whether you're from there or you're going through there and adventuring there as a source point, it's just a great base location since it's just in the middle of so much other stuff.
Yeah.
We're going to go to the Hornsaw, come back to Hollowfaust for reprovisioning, and whatever. It's its own keep on the Borderlands, except, one necromancer.
Right.
And you don't have to play a wizard either, because they've got the bards, they've got the fighters. You could be a monk from nearby Lochiel. It all, ranger who knows how to wander around the gas cars. Not that anyone plays a ranger in 5e.
It was my first character. So I think that'll wrap up this week's Hollowfaust. We'll dive back into the current standing of the city, some of the amazing critters they have come up with. I don't know if critters is the right word for it because they're not technically alive.
Oh, not so much.
Yeah.
Including my favorite monster in the creature collection. So I can't wait to get into that.
What will it be? Tune in next time to find out what Sarah's favorite monster.
Monster of Nightmares.
I'll give a hint. It's actually a group of monsters, but that's all I'm going to say. Yeah. It's a monster that is a group of monsters. Okay. So for this week, Sarah, why don't you tell us all about yourself?
Sarah Stewart. I am a Scarred Lands community creator as well as author. I wrote this book over here, Vigilant Through Shadows and Dreams, book 1. I'm pretending to work on the sequel, but really I've had no time to work on the sequel because I've been doing the books like this, Frostlands of Fenric. And I'm going to be putting out a supplement for Frostlands of Fenric out as soon as we're done formatting it, which is probably going into next week because stuff happened this week and I lost a few days this week to work on that. It's always fun. So do that, and I've got I've got about 4 other titles on Drive-Thru RPG, so check those out.
Yeah, nice.
And who are you?
And I am Jeremy Hochhalter. Before I forget, I'm going to actually say, we're talking about Hollowfaust and the evil necromancers of Glivid Atoll. Is that right?
Sure.
I always forget, as I go to say it, I'm like, wait, how is it spelled? Starting Monday, so before our next episode, but Monday, the 23rd? Yep, the 23rd. Onyx Path is starting the Kickstarter for Dead Man's Rust. I will definitely be sharing links to that, but go check it out. If you haven't seen the cover art alone, it is amazing. I am so excited for this campaign setting. Everything that's going to come into it is going to have new monsters, new spells, an amazing long story arc for you to take characters from. Sarah, do you know what the max is?
No, I don't. I actually didn't work on Dead Man's Rust.
Gotcha. I don't know if you had any inside information.
My wife Fran did. My wife Fran worked on it.
I know it's been described as a mega adventure,
it's a
which
mega adventure.
Most of them go to at least level 15. Oh, okay. So Fran is currently saying around 10 to 12. So not quite that 15 going into tier 4, but still many, many game sessions of fun. So go check that out when it comes on Kickstarter on Monday. Go ahead.
I would say it definitely involves necromancers.
Yes. and the Hollow Legionnaires, which we will soon, in the coming weeks, especially during that Kickstarter, we will cover the Gleaming Valley, the Hollow Legionnaires and their origin. So tune back in for all of the fun. I am Jeremy Hochhalter. You can find me on Twitter at WHPubs, here on Twitch at WH Publications, same as on Facebook. I publish on the Solution Vault DM's Guild, Drive Through RPG. I also have a Fenrilic thing that should have come out already. Same thing. Life happens, and it will be out soon. So keep your eye out for that. That's all I got for this week. Everyone stay safe, take care of yourselves and of each other, and we'll see you next time. Bye.